What if the cruelest rejection you ever endured was the door to your true destiny? For 18 years, Nira Vale was nothing more than a shadow within the Shadowvale Pack, the weak unwanted Omega, the ghost everyone mocked and forgot. On the night meant to reveal her destined mate, she didn't find love. She found humiliation. Brutal, public, final, rejected, broken, cast aside. But what neither her pack nor the Alpha who destroyed her spirit knew was that Selene, the moon goddess, never makes mistakes. They had thrown away their Omega unaware that the woman they scorned was fated to the most powerful werewolf alive, Kael Draven, the Alpha King. This is how the most despised wolf became the most honored queen. The forests of Washington that surrounded Shadowvale always smelled of pine and rain-soaked soil, a scent that meant home to most. But for Nira, it was the scent of her prison. At 18, she was the lowest of the low, a stray among wolves. Her parents had been rogues killed for trespassing years ago, and Darius Thorne, the Alpha, had shown a fleeting spark of mercy by letting the scrawny pup stay. But his mercy had long since rotted into contempt. Nira's life was a quiet misery. She slept in the old moldy groundskeeper's shed behind the pack house, a damp box reeking of mildew. While others feasted on fresh kills, she survived on scraps stolen when Hattie, the strict kitchen matron, wasn't watching. Her wolf Sarah was a weak, trembling whisper in her mind, small, silvery, and incomplete. Nira had never managed a full shift. Claws, senses, yes. But the full transformation, never. Another mark of her supposed defect. Mockery was her daily ritual. Watch it, Omega, barked Colt, a bulky enforcer slamming into her shoulder so the bucket in her hands splashed down her worn tunic. You're spilling your filth everywhere, he sneered. Laughter followed. Lyra, the polished beta, with golden hair and venom in her smile, flicked her curls and added, Honestly, I don't even know why Alpha Darius keeps her around. She's pathetic. Can't even shift right. What good is a wolf who can't run? Nira kept her gaze fixed on the mud hands tightening on the bucket's handle. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely there. Sorry doesn't clean the floor, Mutt, Colt spat. She said nothing. Silence was her only armor. Any spark of defiance brought pain, so she endured. Her only refuge was the forest's hum, the one place where the cruelty of others couldn't reach her. But tonight was different. Tonight was the mate revelation ceremony, the night when Selene would reveal every wolf's fated half. It was sacred, a night of hope, unity, and love. But for Nira, it was pure dread. Her only friend, a kind-hearted Omega named Finn, found her hiding behind the shed, trying to melt into the shadows. You can't skip it, Nira, he said softly. Alpha Darius made attendance mandatory. If you don't show, he'll have you hanging by your thumbs. Maybe that'd be better, she muttered, clutching her knees. Who would ever be mated to me, Finn? I'm broken. Packless. Selene wouldn't be that cruel. Finn sat beside her, his scent carrying quiet worry. You don't know that. Maybe your mate's from another pack, someone kind who'll take you away from here. Hope fluttered inside her, fragile as a butterfly in a storm. Just for a heartbeat, she dared to imagine it, a mate who wouldn't look at her with disgust, whose touch might heal instead of hurt. That fragile dream shattered when Riven Thorne, the Alpha's son and future heir, appeared. He was 21 strong every inch. The wolf others admired. Dark hair, a sharp jaw, and eyes as cold as winter steel. And he was the author of all her pain. Riven loved reminding her of her place. He stood before them, arms crossed, flanked by Colt and Lyra. He didn't spare Finn a glance. His gaze locked on Nira with icy contempt. Well, what do we have here? He drawled. The pack's pity case, praying Selene will throw her a bone. Lyra giggled, tilting her head. Oh, please, Riven. The goddess wouldn't waste a decent male on her. Maybe old Amos will get lucky and claim her before he forgets his own name. Their laughter sliced through her like claws, and in that moment beneath the moonlight, Nira knew whatever fate had in store tonight, it would not bring mercy. She'll probably end up mated to Old Man Amos, the one who lost his mind last winter, Lyra said with a cruel laugh that made the rest of the pack howl. The sound sliced through the twilight like broken glass. Nira Vale felt her stomach knot so tightly she could barely breathe. Riven Thorne stepped forward, crouching until his face was level with hers. The power radiating from him, alpha dominance, thick as a storm, hit her like lightning and rain-soaked earth. It should have been intoxicating. Instead, it suffocated her. Let's make one thing clear. Omega, he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Pray to your precious Selene that you are not my mate. Because if by some cosmic joke, some cruel mistake of the gods, your name is tied to mine tonight, I'll reject you in front of everyone. I'll rip that bond apart so completely. You'll feel your soul split in two. His eyes burned with icy disgust as he added, the future alpha of the Shadowvale Pack will never be chained to a weak, pitiful stain like you. Understand? The threat stole every bit of air from her lungs. Nira could only nod, a single tear cutting through the grime on her cheek. Riven smirked, satisfied with her fear. Good. He straightened, towering over her again. Now get to the clearing. Your stench is ruining the night air. As he and his friends walked away, their laughter echoing behind them, Nira felt Finn's fragile hope die inside her chest. She was a fool, forever believing she might deserve more. Tonight wasn't a night for dreams, it was a night for punishment. And she had already been condemned. The ceremonial clearing pulsed with restless energy. Torches burned gold against the darkness, casting flickering shadows across the eager faces of the Shadowvale Pack. The full moon hung above them, a perfect silver eye watching in silence. At the center stood Riven Thorne, his presence heavy with authority and pride. Nira slipped quietly to the back, pressing herself behind a wide oak, her heart hammering like a trapped bird. Every laugh, every whisper of excitement stabbed at her like tiny knives. One by one, wolves found their fated partners, eyes meeting, sparks of recognition, flashing soft embraces leading to the sacred nuzzling at the neck. The air hummed with joy until Darius raised his hand. Riven Thorne, he announced. A hush fell instantly. All eyes turned toward the Alpha's son, the crown prince of Shadowvale. Riven strode confidently to the center. His every movement practiced deliberate. His sharp gaze swept over the gathering of she-wolves, like a hunter assessing prey. Nira pressed harder against the tree bark, whispering a silent prayer. Not me. Please, Selene, not me. But the goddess had a dark sense of irony. Riven's eyes locked with hers. For one terrifying, heart-stopping moment, the world disappeared. A blinding pulse of silver light flared behind her eyes, and the scent of ozone filled her lungs. A single echoing word thundered through her mind, mate. Inside her, Sarah, the wolf who had been silent for years, awoke with a howl of raw, wild joy. Mate. He's ours. Ours. Across the clearing, Riven staggered back, clutching his chest, eyes wide in disbelief. He had felt it too. The pull, the bond, the inescapable truth. And in that instant, everyone knew. Gasps swept through the pack like wildfire. Whispers rose, shocked and venomous. Lyra's face twisted with rage, and Riven Thorne's jaw turned to stone. For a single heartbeat, joy filled Nira's chest before it shattered under the venom in Riven's glare. He regained his composure, face hardening into something cold and cruel. He walked toward her, not like a man meeting his destined half, but like an executioner claiming his victim. The pack parted for him. The air went still. He stopped in front of Nira, their bond pulsing between them, its warmth colliding with his disgust. No, he said flatly, voice carrying across the clearing. Absolutely not. Turning to the crowd, he made a show of it, a performance meant to destroy her completely. "I, Riven Thorne, future alpha of the Shadowvale Pack," he said, voice dripping venom, "reject you, Nira Vale, as my mate." The words struck like claws to her heart. Nira gasped, her hands clutching her chest as unbearable agony tore through her being. It wasn't physical, it was spiritual, sacred. It felt like her soul was being ripped apart. She crumpled silent screams, echoing through her mind as the bond shattered into ash. Nira's silent scream tore through her mind until her knees buckled. But Riven Thorne wasn't done. "I reject this bond." He hissed his words, dripping with venom. "I will not be tainted by a weak, rogue-blooded Omega. You are nothing, worthless, a disgrace to this pack and a stain on my name." Celine must have gone blind tonight. Then turning toward Lyra, who watched with a triumphant smirk, he seized her arm and pulled her close. This he declared to the crowd as a woman worthy of the Shadowvale Pack, strong, pure, powerful. The crowd shifted. Shock turned to cruel exhilaration. The whispers rose into laughter and jeers. "He's right," someone shouted. "Good riddance," another called. "Filthy Omega doesn't deserve an alpha." The sound twisted around Nira like fire, every word fanning the flames of her pain. The agony of rejection burned through her body, searing into her soul. Her knees hit the ground. She shook with silent sobs, unable to breathe through the pain tearing her apart. Through the blur of tears, she saw Riven lean down, his expression cold, and press his lips to Lyra's in a deliberate, possessive kiss. It was a cruel show for everyone to see, a final act of humiliation. Something inside Nira snapped. She stumbled to her feet and fled through the clearing, through the sneers and the laughter, running until the sound of it all dissolved into the night. Branches lashed her face as she tore through the dark woods. Her lungs burned. Her chest felt like it was caving in. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Even as she ran, Riven's voice echoed inside her head, cruel and merciless. "I reject you." She ran until her legs gave out. Collapsing onto damp moss beside a small creek, she lay there gasping. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, glinting off her tear-soaked tunic. Inside her, Sarah was silent dead weight in her mind. The bright spark that had flared for one fleeting second when she'd felt their bond was gone. What remained was an aching, bleeding emptiness. She was broken. Utterly, completely broken. Curled in on herself, she wished the earth would swallow her whole. No pack. No mate. No reason to live. But what she didn't know was that her pain had become something more, a pulse. A ripple of raw energy that spread far beyond the borders of Shadowvale, reaching across forests, mountains, and rivers. And somewhere in the heart of the Rocky Mountains, that ripple struck the fortress of a king. Within the black stone walls of his citadel, Kael Draven, the Alpha King, sat alone in his study. The room itself felt ancient, lined with relics and tomes, shadows flickering under the light of a roaring fire. But the warmth never touched him. At over 5 centuries old, Kael ruled every pack in North America. His bloodline was the first, his power absolute. To some, he was a myth. To others, a god cloaked in flesh. He had led armies, crushed rebellions, and watched empires fall to dust. Yet beneath all that power, one truth haunted him. He was alone. He had lived lifetimes searching for the one meant to be his, and found only emptiness. He had long ago accepted it, that he was doomed to rule without love. But tonight, everything changed. A violent wave of agony slammed into him, so sharp and raw, it nearly brought him to his knees. He gasped, his hand clutching the edge of his mahogany desk until the wood cracked beneath his grip. The pain wasn't his. It was something else, something sacred. It tore through him like lightning through bone. His ancient wolf, Rael, roared within his mind, enraged and confused. "What is this?" Rael thundered. "A curse. An attack." "No," Kael growled, eyes flashing silver as he steadied himself. "It's a bond, a true one, being torn apart." He closed his eyes, reaching out with his senses, following the thread of agony, that still reverberated through the spiritual plane. It wasn't just pain, it was holy devastation, the kind that made even gods grieve. He recognized it instantly, the breaking of a fated mate bond. Rejections like this were rare, but this one felt cataclysmic. It shook something deep within him, resonating with power ancient as the moon itself. It was as if Selene herself had cried out in mourning. The doors burst open, and Rowan, his second in command, stormed in. "My king! What's wrong?" His hand instinctively went to the silver dagger at his hip. Kael straightened, his silver eyes burning with fury and purpose. "A bond has been broken," he growled. His voice rumbled through the room like thunder. "A true bond, one touched by divine power. Whoever did this has committed a sin against the sacred law." He turned to the massive map covering the wall, pressing his palm against it, letting his power reach out. His breathing slowed. His instincts sharpened, and then his eyes opened, cold, glowing silver. There he murmured, voice like ice. "The source comes from the northwest, the Shadowvale territory." He followed the echo of that spiritual cry, a faint, trembling thread of agony pulling him southeast. Kael Draven hovered, his hand above the map, spread across his desk, tracing the air with closed eyes, his power reaching outward like smoke. There he murmured, his voice low, almost reverent. His finger stopped over a small green patch hidden among the forests of Washington. Shadowvale Pack. That's where it came from. His brows furrowed, silver eyes narrowing. A minor pack ruled by Riven Thorne, insignificant in the grand scheme. How could something so small cause a disruption powerful enough to shake the kingdom itself? Rowan, standing at his side, shifted uneasily. Could it be a trap? Kael's voice turned quiet, dangerously quiet. "No, this is no trick." His gaze darkened, a storm brewing behind those ageless eyes. "Something is wrong. The she-wolf who endured this. Her spirit feels familiar, like a song I once knew, faint, forgotten, but haunting." He clenched his fist. "The alpha who rejected her is a fool. He's broken one of Selene's most sacred laws and unleashed chaos across the bond-threaded world." "Prepare my escort," Kael ordered, his tone like thunder, barely restrained. "We leave immediately. I'll see this abomination undone, and the one who caused it punished." Rowan hesitated for only a breath, then bowed sharply. He knew that look in his king's eyes. It was the look Kael wore before battle. Shadowvale had no idea what storm was descending upon them. They had committed a sin, not just against one of their own, but against the very order that bound their kind together. Within the hour, a line of black, unmarked SUVs tore down the winding roads of the Rockies. Inside the lead vehicle, Kael sat in silence. The hum of the engine drowned beneath the pounding echo of that pain, still reverberating through his chest. His jaw was tight, silver eyes locked on the horizon. He could still feel her, the faint trace of the broken bond calling to him like a ghost's whisper. Something inside him, something ancient and long dormant, stirred to life. He didn't yet know who she was. But he knew this injustice had been done, and he would be its reckoning. At the edge of dawn, Nira Vale had cried herself into a hollow stillness. The forest around her was washed in pale gray light, the creek beside her murmuring softly. Her body was cold, every muscle stiff with exhaustion. The pain inside her had dulled to a hollow throb, as if her soul itself had gone numb. She lay there motionless, waiting for nothing. That's when the earth began to tremble. It wasn't an earthquake, it was rhythmic, deliberate, the ground pulsing beneath her like the heartbeat of something vast and ancient. A primal dread slid through her, deeper than anything Riven Thorne had ever made her feel. Inside her mind, Sarah stirred weakly, a trembling whimper of warning. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen force that pressed down on her chest, stealing her breath. Power. Absolute, primal, unyielding. It rolled through the trees like thunder. Every instinct Nira possessed screamed at her, to kneel, to bow her head, to submit. It was the scent of dominance, but magnified beyond comprehension. It smelled of storms and rain-soaked pine, of fire and eternity. Through the trees, headlights broke the dawn. 3 black Jeep Wranglers rumbled to a halt on the old forest road. The engines died and the forest held its breath. Doors opened. Men stepped out, massive, silent, moving, with the precision of predators. The insignia on their dark tactical gear glinted faintly in the light. The Iron Guard. Nira's pulse quickened. The king's personal warriors. Then the rear door of the lead vehicle opened, and he emerged. He was tall, taller than any man she'd ever seen, his presence bending the very air around him. He wore simple black trousers and a gray Henley that did nothing to hide the sculpted strength beneath. His hair was dark as midnight, streaked faintly with silver at the temples. But it was his eyes, those molten silver eyes, that froze her blood. They weren't just ancient. They were eternal. This wasn't an alpha. This was Kael Draven, the Lycan King. Nira's breath hitched. She had heard the stories whispered around campfires, the immortal ruler of all wolves. Ruthless, untouchable, the one who enforced Selene's law. Why was he here? Kael inhaled deeply, closing his eyes. The faint echo of that spiritual wound led him straight to this place. The scent of her anguish lingered in the air, raw, broken, but beneath it, something else, something divine. The fragrance was unlike anything he'd ever known. Not just the scent of pine or sorrow, but moonlight on snow, wild jasmine blooming under starlight, and the quiet purity of something eternal. It struck him deep, shaking, centuries of control. For the first time in 500 years, the king's heart remembered how to ache. His eyes snapped open, sharp, glowing silver, and locked directly onto her through the mist by the creek. There was no hiding from Kael Draven. His gaze was a command of its own. He moved toward her, not with Riven's arrogant stride, but with something infinitely more dangerous. Controlled, deliberate power. Every motion spoke of authority that didn't need to shout. His guards. The Iron Guard fanned out instantly, their dark tactical uniforms blending with the forest. They formed a silent perimeter, scanning the shadows, ready to strike at a word. Nira Vale stumbled backward until her spine hit a fallen log. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Please. I've done nothing wrong." Kael stopped just a few feet away. He said nothing at first. He only looked at her, taking in the dirt on her face, the torn edges of her clothes, and the silent agony burning in her eyes. A muscle ticked in his jaw. This trembling girl, this broken thing, was the epicenter of the spiritual quake that had shaken his kingdom to its knees. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and resonant, a sound that seemed to vibrate through her bones. "You are the one," he said. "The one who was rejected." She flinched at the word but nodded weakly. Kael took another step closer, and the world itself seemed to shift. The instant he crossed into her aura, it struck. A surge of raw power exploded through the air, violent and beautiful, so much stronger than anything she'd ever felt. It wasn't a spark. It was an inferno. The ground hummed. The forest held its breath. The scent of rain and pine, of lightning and old forest surrounded her. But it wasn't threatening, it felt like coming home. The empty void in her chest, left bleeding by Riven's rejection, was suddenly filled with warmth, golden, roaring, divine. And then came the word, an ancient, thunderous voice, echoing through her mind and soul alike. Mate. Inside her, Sarah erupted, no longer weak, no longer silent. The she-wolf howled fierce and wild, her song a blend of triumph and disbelief. Our alpha, our mate. Nira's eyes widened as she stared up at him, trembling. Kael's own composure shattered. He staggered back a step as if struck by lightning. The cold mask he had worn for centuries cracked, disbelief flooding his face. He saw it. He felt it. The connection was undeniable. This fragile, broken Omega was his. the mate he had waited for across half a millennium. The piece of his soul he thought had been lost to time. "It can't be," he whispered, barely audible, his voice rough with wonder and fear. The crash of branches tore the moment apart. From the shadows, Riven Thorne and a dozen Shadowvale warriors burst into the clearing, led by Riven himself. "Who dares trespass on Shadowvale land?" Riven barked, until his eyes found the king. He froze, his face drained of blood, his bravado vanishing in an instant. He dropped to his knees, head bowed. "Your Majesty, forgive us. We didn't know you were." Darius followed suit, the rest of the pack scrambling to kneel, trembling. Kael ignored them. His gaze never left Nira. His world had narrowed to the fragile she-wolf, shaking before him, the one whose soul called to his own. Then his eyes shifted to Riven, and the cold fire within them ignited. When he spoke, his voice was no longer human. "You," he growled the word, vibrating through the air. "You are the future alpha of this pathetic pack." Riven bowed deeper, his body shaking. "Yes, my king." Kael took a slow step forward. "And last night," he said softly, too softly, "you performed a rejection ceremony." "I did, my king." Riven stammered, "On a worthless Omeg." "Do not finish that sentence." The roar that followed wasn't sound. It was power. It rolled through the clearing like a shockwave, knocking several wolves flat to the ground. Even the trees seemed to tremble. Kael's eyes blazed like molten silver as he turned back to Nira. For the first time, his fury flickered into something else, something raw and aching. Pain. He looked back at the kneeling pack, his voice booming across the forest. "You didn't just reject an Omega," he thundered. "You fools, blind, arrogant fools, you cast away a gift from Selene herself." He extended a hand toward Nira, his expression fierce yet reverent. "You rejected my fated mate." He paused, the weight of his next words striking like a hammer. "You rejected your queen." The silence that followed was absolute, so thick it smothered the air itself. Even the leaves seemed to freeze. Every wolf in the clearing stared in horror. Riven Thorne looked like stone pale, trembling, every trace of arrogance burned away. And for the first time in Shadowvale history, the pack truly understood what it meant to fear a king. He hadn't just rejected a mate, he had committed treason against the crown. Riven Thorne had rejected and brutalized the fated queen of the Lycans. Kael Draven no longer spared the pack a glance. His attention was wholly fixed on Nira Vale. Slowly, deliberately, he knelt before her, moving with the wary grace of a warrior approaching something sacred or wounded. Power radiated from him, but his eyes, those molten silver eyes, held a raw tenderness she never expected. "Nira," he said softly, her name rolling from his lips like a vow. It was the first time anyone had spoken her name without disgust. "I am Kael Draven," he murmured, "and Selene has finally answered my prayers." He extended his hand. It was large and scarred, a soldier's hand, but his touch was gentle, reverent. Hesitantly, Nira placed her trembling fingers into his. The instant their skin met, the bond ignited. Not a spark, an inferno. Warmth surged through her, melting the icy remnants of Riven's rejection. The hollow pain in her chest was replaced by something fierce and golden. Kael pulled her gently to her feet, the strength in his grip effortless but protective. He shrugged off his heavy coat and draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her whole, smelling of him, power, safety, storm, and home. Then he turned to the Shadowvale Pack, his arms steady around her, as his voice dropped into a low, dangerous rumble. "Riven Thorne will present himself at my fortress in 3 days, Kael said. Every word, sharp as steel, to answer for the crimes committed under his rule. His eyes locked on Riven, cold and merciless. "As for you, pray to Selene, because her mercy is the only thing that might save you from mine." Without another word, he led Nira toward the waiting convoy. The iron guard closed around them, like shadows, unyielding, silent, lethal. The pack watched paralyzed by fear as their king's warriors formed a wall between their new queen and her former tormentors. When Nira climbed into the luxurious SUV, she glanced back one last time. Faces she'd once feared cold Lyra. All of them now stared at her in horror. Not hatred, not mockery, terror. And at the center of it all, Riven Thorne knelt in the dirt, his head buried in his hands. A man who had just destroyed his own destiny. Nira felt no triumph, only disbelief. The ride to the fortress blurred by soft leather seats, the muted rumble of engines, the steady weight of Kael's hand over hers. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was sacred. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. Exhaustion finally claimed her. She drifted into a dreamless sleep, lulled by the hum of the road and the steady pulse of the king beside her. When she awoke, sunlight poured through tall glass windows. She was lying on a bed, so vast and soft it felt unreal. The room around her was carved from stone and shadow, the hearth crackling with steady warmth. She was in the king's fortress. Moments later, the door opened. Kael entered carrying a silver tray himself. Gone was the imposing armor of a ruler. He wore a simple black tunic and trousers. The weight of command had lifted from him, leaving behind something achingly human. "You've slept an entire day," he said quietly. "Your body and your spirit were completely spent." He set the tray down. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, cheese fruit. The scent made her stomach twist with hunger. A faint, almost tender smile touched his lips. "Eat. You'll need your strength." Nira obeyed, tears stinging her eyes as she tasted real food for the first time in years. Kael watched her, his expression soft but shadowed. "What Riven Thorne did to you, the severing of that bond, is a cruelty I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. But understand this, Nira." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The connection you had with him, it wasn't true. It was a distortion, a false echo of what was meant to be." She looked up, the confusion flickering in her gaze. He continued, "It happens sometimes among bloodlines of power. The divine threads cross. A bond latches onto the wrong conduit before finding its rightful source." He met her eyes, then voiced low but steady. "What you felt for him was a shadow of the real thing. Ours." Nira froze. Kael's gaze softened further as he spoke, his tone now reverent. "You aren't who they told you you were. You are not the child of rogues. You are the last of the Luna Omegas, a lineage thought extinct. A bloodline born to heal, to connect, to balance the Alpha King's power. You were never meant to kneel before anyone." Her heart thundered as his words sank in. "Your parents," Kael said grimly, "were murdered by Darius Thorne. He knew what you were. He feared you. So he buried you in servitude and shame to keep your power from awakening. It was too much." Her world cracked open under the truth. Her parents murdered, her life manipulated. Every humiliation, every lash of cruelty, all part of a calculated lie. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks. Kael reached forward, his hand trembling slightly before it brushed away a tear. His voice dropped to a whisper rough with emotion. "No more lies, Nira Vale. No more chains." "Why?" Nira whispered, her voice breaking. "Why would he do that?" Kael's jaw clenched, his tone dark. "Because strength like yours terrifies a weak alpha. Darius Thorne built his pack on fear, not respect. He couldn't risk a Luna powerful enough to balance him, so he crushed every spark of power he saw. And he raised his son in that same image." Over the following days, Nira slowly recovered. Her body healed under the care of attentive servants who treated her with a reverence that felt foreign and almost unbearable. Her new chambers were vast and sunlit, filled with warmth and quiet. Kael Draven was always there, never demanding, never prying, just present. He shared stories of his long reign, his wars, and the endless solitude that came before her. And in return, he listened, truly. listened to her story of pain and endurance. He introduced her to Rowan, his beta stern, loyal and steady as stone, who swore his allegiance to her without hesitation. Day by day, the hollow pain left by Riven Thorne's rejection began to fade. In its place grew something warm and constant, the hum of her bond with Kael. Inside her, her wolf thrived again, strong, fierce, alive. The broken whimpers in her mind turned to a steady, joyful purr that filled every corner of her soul. One night, Kael brought her to a moonlit balcony high above the fortress. The wind carried the scent of pine and rain, and his silver eyes reflected the stars. "I waited 5 centuries for you, Nira," he said quietly, "and I'll wait longer if I must for you to heal, to trust, to choose me as I've already chosen you. I won't mark you. I won't claim you, not until you're ready to claim me in return." For the first time since the rejection, a real smile touched her lips. The mighty Alpha King, the man who could crush mountains with a command, was offering her freedom. I think I'm starting to feel safe," she said softly. His answering smile broke through the cold night like dawn. In that moment, surrounded by power and silence, Nira Vale finally understood she hadn't been taken as a prisoner or a prize. She'd been brought home. Life inside the royal fortress was a revelation. For the first time, she witnessed a pack united, not by fear, but by loyalty and respect. Warriors trained with honor. The staff moved with pride. And at the center stood Kael, ruling not as a tyrant, but as a protector. They called her Luna Queen. Every time she passed, heads bowed. For someone who'd spent her life being ignored or mocked, the sudden reverence was overwhelming. Sensing her unease, Kael asked Mira, Rowan's mate and the head healer, to guide her. Mira's presence was calm and kind, her eyes wise. "The lunar Omega blood runs strong in you," Mira told her, afternoon, among the garden's lavender blooms. "But it's been chained for too long. You must wake it, free it." And so Nira began to train, not to fight, but to control. Guided by Mira, she learned to reach beyond fear, deep into herself, calling out to the wolf that had been silenced for years. Kael stayed nearby, silent but steady. His presence a grounding force that reminded her she was never alone. The breakthrough came on the night of the next full moon. Kael led her high into the mountains to a sacred stone circle bathed in silver light. The air was sharp and pure. The moon loomed so close it felt alive. "This is a place of power," Kael murmured, his voice resonant and deep. "Let the moon's light fill you. Don't fight it. Sarah knows the way, trust her." Nira closed her eyes. For once she didn't reach for her wolf with desperation, but with love. She called Sarah home, not as a command, but as a welcome. And Sarah answered. "It's time," the wolf's voice whispered within her mind. "We are safe now. We are home." The energy that flooded Nira's body was unlike anything she'd ever felt, cool and silver, like liquid moonlight. Her bones shifted. Her skin shimmered, and fur began to bloom across her body, not as a curse, but as release. When she opened her eyes, the world had changed. She stood on 4 paws, surrounded by a halo of pale silver light. Her fur glowed sleek and radiant, not the dull gray of weakness, but the shining silver of divine strength. She wasn't small anymore. She wasn't broken. She was magnificent. Kael had shifted too. Rael, his wolf, towered beside her, a massive beast, the color of storm and shadow, with eyes of molten silver. He was power incarnate, every movement a ripple of ancient authority. And when their gazes met under Selena's moon, the air between them shimmered with something primal and eternal. 2 souls finally made whole. As Kael Draven approached, his massive wolf form moved with reverence, not dominance. He lowered his head and nudged Nira Vale gently, the gesture tender, almost sacred. The bond between them pulsed like living light, a perfect rhythm of moon and sun, shadow and flame. Then with a shared howl, they ran together through the night, a streak of silver and a wave of black cutting across the ancient stones under Celine's glow. For the first time in her life, Nira felt truly free, wild, whole. Her transformation wasn't just physical, it was the awakening of her Luna Omega power. During one of her training sessions, a young warrior, barely more than a boy, snapped his leg during sparring. Mira rushed forward to help, but something inside Nira stirred. She knelt beside the trembling youth and placed her hands on his injury. A soft silver light poured from her palms. Gasps filled the air as the bone fused before their eyes, the skin sealing over without a scar. The boy's pain vanished. Awe replaced agony. From that day, the entire fortress changed. Warriors grew calmer in her presence. Pups slept more peacefully when she passed. Her touch healed wounds beyond flesh hearts, fears, grief. Nira wasn't just Kael's queen by title, she was the soul of Shadowvale itself. Far away in the Shadowvale territory, chaos spread like wildfire. As ordered, Riven Thorne had appeared before the Alpha King. The meeting lasted only hours, but when he returned, he was a hollow man. Stripped of title and power, he was condemned to remain as a disgraced elder, a living reminder of what happens when arrogance defies the crown. The pack fractured without leadership. Riven Thorne, once their golden heir, was cast out as a traitor. His chosen mate Lyra abandoned him publicly, calling him weak as she clawed her way toward other alphas. Hunts failed. Wolves fought among themselves. Without an alpha and a Luna, the Shadowvale Pack withered. Riven wandered its borders like a ghost haunted by what he had destroyed. He had not only lost his mate, he had doomed his bloodline. When news of Nira's rebirth reached him, her silver wolf, her rising power, it was like hearing his own death sentence. One evening, on the high balcony of the fortress, the sunset painted the sky in fire and lavender. Nira stood beside Kael, the wind catching her dark hair. The warmth of his presence wrapped around her like armor. "I'm not that broken Omega anymore," she said, her voice steady, eyes shining with strength. "I finally know who I am." Kael turned his gaze full of awe and something deeper devotion. "I've always known who you were, my queen," he said softly. Nira rose on her toes and brushed her lips against his. The touch was lightning and home all at once. "Then it's time," she whispered. "Time for you to claim your mate." Kael's answering kiss wasn't about power, it was about promise, eternity sealed under the stars. But even as they stood together, bound by fate and fire, darkness gathered on the horizon. At the far edge of Shadowvale lands, the Bloodfang Pack had been waiting, watching the weakness grow. Led by the brutal Alpha Varric, they launched their strike with savage precision. The assault was merciless. Without unity or strength, the Shadowvale wolves fell one by one. The forest burned red beneath the moon. A lone scout stumbled through the fortress gates hours later, bleeding, gasping, barely alive. "They're killing them," he rasped to Kael and Nira in the war chamber. "Varric. He's butchering the males, claiming the land, the women, everything. By sunrise, there'll be nothing left." Kael's face darkened. "By law, I'm not bound to intervene," he said coldly. "They brought this ruin upon themselves." Nira stood still for a heartbeat. Then she stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "They're still ours," she said quietly. "They may be cruel. They may be lost. But the innocent, the pups, the elders, they don't deserve this." Every eye turned to her. Kael's gaze locked on hers, searching. "These are the wolves who tormented you," he said. "You would save them." Her answer came without hesitation. "Yes," she said. "Because mercy is what separates a ruler from a monster. I'm not the Omega they once scorned." Nira Vale declared, her voice cutting through the war room like a blade of light. "And I'm not a queen who'll stand by while her people, flawed as they are slaughtered. They broke me once. My revenge won't be watching them die. It'll be showing them what a true Luna really is." A slow, fierce smile spread across Kael Draven's face, half pride, half reverence. "As my queen commands," he said, turning to Rowan. "Ready the Iron Guard. We ride for war." When the king's army reached Shadowvale, the battle was nearly lost. The packhouse burned flames clawing toward the night sky. Varric and his blood-fang wolves had driven the last defenders into the ceremonial clearing, the same cursed ground where Nira had once been rejected. At the center of the chaos stood Riven Thorne, bloodied, broken, barely standing. Gone was the arrogant heir. In his place fought a wolf driven by guilt and despair. He defended a cluster of terrified pups and elders, taking blow after blow, with no thought for his own life. Lyra was nowhere to be found. She had fled long before the first cry of war. Just as Varric raised his claws for a killing strike, a thunderous war horn shook the valley. The sound rolled like the voice of the moon itself. Then came the avalanche, the Iron Guard armor gleaming, descending like storm clouds. At their head, a silver wolf blazed under the moonlight, her presence commanding the very air. The Bloodfangs froze. They had expected an easy kill, not the Alpha King himself. Kael, in his towering black wolf form, hit their line like a tidal wave. Rael, his beast, tore through their ranks with ancient fury, his growls shaking the trees. The Iron Guard followed, precise, merciless, unstoppable. But it was Nira who changed everything. She didn't fight with claws or teeth. She fought with light. In her radiant silver wolf form, she raced through the battlefield. Wherever she passed, calm replaced chaos. Wounded wolves lifted their heads. Fear melted from their hearts. She laid her head gently beside the dying, and a halo of silver light soothed their pain. Around her, even the youngest pup stopped trembling. Her magic didn't destroy, it restored. And with that hope, returned to the Shadowvale wolves. Riven, bleeding and shaking, saw what she had become, and something shattered inside him. With a hoarse snarl, he forced himself upright, fighting not for redemption, but for her, the queen he had once destroyed. The battle was short and brutal. Varric met the Alpha King head-on and fell beneath his claws, his reign of cruelty ending in blood. The remaining Bloodfangs scattered into the night, leaving behind silence and ruin. When the smoke cleared, the surviving wolves stared at Nira and Kael as if seeing ghosts wholly untouchable. Kael shifted first, the massive wolf fading into the man. He wrapped his arm around Nira as she changed beside him, her silver hair catching the glow of the dying flames. Before them, Riven collapsed to his knees, his body a map of wounds, his head bowed. "You've got a fool's courage, Riven Thorne," Kael said, his voice low and sharp as winter steel. Riven coughed blood, his tone hoarse. "I deserve death, my king, but thank you for saving them, for saving her." Nira stepped forward. Her eyes softened, not with affection, but mercy. She knelt and laid a hand on his shoulder. A shimmer of light flowed from her touch, sealing his worst wounds. Riven looked up, stunned. "Why?" "Because a queen's strength," Nira said, her voice steady enough to echo through the clearing, "is not measured by vengeance, but by mercy." She rose to her full height, radiant in the smoke and moonlight. "You will live, Riven Thorne. You'll rebuild this pack. You'll teach the next generation that true power isn't in who you can crush, but in who you protect." A murmur rippled through the pack, hope, disbelief, renewal. Nira had not only saved them, she had restored what it meant to be pack. Kael looked down at her, then his eyes filled with awe and something infinite. He had known she was strong. He had known she was his fated mate. But standing there amid fire and ruin, he saw her for what she truly was, his equal, his Luna, his queen. The once rejected Omega had become legend. Her reign began not with vengeance, but with grace. And her story, one born from pain, became a beacon across the kingdoms, a reminder that the scars of the past don't have to define who we become. They can be the very reason we rise. Thank you for joining us on Nira Vale's journey a tale of strength, redemption, and love that defied destiny. If her story touched you, don't forget to leave a like, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe for more stories of fated mates, hidden power, and the unbreakable spirit of the wolf. Until next time, may you find the courage to write your own ending